Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Armenian Music Project. I have Danny Bedrosian with me. Danny, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tigran. Thank you for having me.
It's so great to connect with you. I've known about your work for a long time, actually. And the way I found out about your work is through your project called Secret Army. Tell me a little bit about that. Let's start with that.
Sure, yeah. Well, Secret Army is a group that I founded with a few other members of the rhythm section of Parliament Funkadelic, which is the band that I play with George Clinton. I'm the keyboard player for said group. And the bass player and the lead guitarist and the drummer basically joined me for that project. I started it in 2006, I believe. At a time when I was obviously much younger, was feeling still very, I don't know, young in your 20s, angry Armenian kid wanting to express something artistic, reflecting our plight and our situation in the world. And I was just looking at different things that were still going on for Armenians, things that are still hypocrisy for Armenian people all over the world. And that's sort of what I focused Secret Army's thematic concept towards the bettering of. And the first album reflects that very much. It's just called Secret Army. And then we're 8 albums in, and we have a new album coming out this year called Exaltation. And it's probably my most political since the first album. I'd probably say it's my most political album in 14 years. And it focuses it's actually named after a pamphlet that was circulating around the Ottoman Empire in the 19th century that was basically a call for liberation for the Armenian people. I believe it was written by an Armenian in India or possibly in Isfahan, Iran, one of those merchant communities. He had written it, and it was a very dangerous piece of literature to the Ottoman authorities at the time, and it was an illegal document. And I was hearing some statements about it by an Armenian historian not too long ago, and I was like, oh, that'd be a great sort of loose concept for the next Secret Army album, Exaltation, the name of it too, and like sort of what it represents. And it's interesting because I got sick in March with COVID-19, and I was basically in a quarantine situation for about 4 weeks. And that's when I started the album. That's when I said it's going to be Exaltation. It's going to be about this. So before the current situation in Artsakh, before the most recent fighting, it's only all the more apropos that that's what I'm talking about right now, because it's very much a precursor or really a standing statement for the dialogue of what's going on right now for our people. So I felt like it was a very relevant thing, and unfortunately coincidental with what we have going on, or I should say still relevant with what we have going on. And so that's the new album, Exaltation. It'll be coming very, very soon, before the end of the year.
Most people listening to this will know that about the situation you're talking about in Artsakh and Armenia at the moment. But for those who don't know, or those who might not be Armenian listening to this, because you have many fans who are non-Armenians because of your long career playing with so many musicians, a little bit about what's going on in the moment. And I know it's such a tough thing to explain because it has such a complicated history and the region is so complicated in general, but a little bit about what's going on in this moment in Artsakh and Armenia, and what you've seen and what you've read, because I know you're keeping track.
Yeah, absolutely, Tigran. I'd be happy to. I think we're in an interesting place. I want to preface it by saying we're in a really interesting place right now because the situation being what it is, people like me, Armenians like me, I should say, there was a little idiom I used to hear when I was younger, where there's 2 different kinds of Armenians. There's Armenians that only hang out with Armenians and live a completely Armenian life. And then there's the Armenians that are the token Armenian of their group. They're all Odars and then the one Armenian guy. And that's the Armenian that they all know That's the Armenia that all those Odars know in that circle. And they're like, we know about Armenia and Armenians because of that guy. And as much as the first group ridicules the second group for being with so many Odars, if it weren't for that second group, the Odars wouldn't even know about the first group or the second group or any of us. So I think that there is something to be said. That being said, I have many Armenian friends. I just mean to say that because of my work and because of my my job as an international musician and how globalism is so central to what it is we do as musicians, I find, you know, Armenians probably make up 5 to 15% of my fan base, give or take, depending on the project. Mm-hmm. And so it puts me in a situation where I'm able to alert, reflect, inform the rest of the world about what's happening to us, because politically speaking, it's, as you said, complicated. And sometimes I don't like to use the words complicated because I feel like complicated is, not to sound too nationalistic, but I feel like complicated was a terminology created by the enemy to ascertain a situation on the ground that isn't very complicated or complex if you look at it from an historical perspective. And just to give a little background before I give too much on the current situation, I do hold a degree in Middle Eastern studies. So I am a official degree holding Middle Eastern historian. So this isn't something that's coming from a place of propaganda or whatever. I'm a college educated guy when it comes to this stuff. But to give a little history, Artsakh, or as it was called in Urartian times, Ardak, which is almost exactly the same name, just slight phonetic difference, has existed in its genetic population for thousands and thousands of years, in its national political affiliation as an Armenian populated area for about that long, couple thousand years, few thousand years, at least to the Urartian era. So some can claim the 8th century BC. If we're looking at it from kingdoms, Armenian royal dynasties, you can at least go back to the 5th or 4th century BC, give or take. Either way, we're talking about 2,400 to almost 3,000 years of continual habitation by an Armenian majority, and by a majority that's genetically homogenous and genetically belonging to one group, I should say, and basically being autochthonous and aboriginal to this region. So like, we're basically talking about, yes, there are people, there are Armenians, but in Artsakh, it's important to note that they are the aboriginal inhabitants of Artsakh. They are the autochthonous genetic population there. They're the first people there. And, you know, when they test remains of mummies, if you will, for lack of a better word, from the region, be it in the Caucasus or northern Iran, places like this. They won't do it in Turkey for obvious political reasons, but sensitivity issues. But whenever they do that, they find that our people have the closest genetic imprint to those mummies, to those ancient inhabitants of the historic Armenian highland. So this isn't, so even the people who are telling the world the people of Artsakh are the Aborigines, they're still not even giving the full picture that that's not the only place where Armenians were the Aborigines. It just happens to be one of the last places where the Aboriginal Armenians still make up the majority, along with the Republic and along with Javak in the modern Republic of Georgia and Hamshen in Turkey and a couple other places, Glendale. But other than those few places, you know, those are what's left of our Aboriginal population. That's why it's important to Armenians. And then just giving a more modern history, and Armenian communities have existed. And then just to give a little bit of the medieval side, all through the Turco-Tartar Mongol invasions of the Armenian highland, the 5 principalities, the 5 melikdoms of Karabakh, of Artsakh, were always pretty much independent, even if the land around it was conquered by Genghis Khan or Tamerlane. They never were really able to get into these mountain fastnesses. It was just too difficult terrain, and the people there were proud warrior class that it just wasn't the same can be said of Sassoon and Zeytun for many, many centuries. It just only with the advent of the Ottoman artillery did those places fall. But Artsakh luckily never fell to, it was under Persian domination and then Russian, and so it didn't fall to the same fate as Western Armenia. During Sovietization, Joseph Stalin included the Artsakh, those five Melikdoms, into the Azerbaijani SSR, as well as Nakhchivan, which was another really Armenian place that had been arbitrarily placed, and really an exclave too, not even contiguous with the geography of Azerbaijan, and put it in the Azerbaijani SSR, which, by the way, wasn't even called Azerbaijan until the 1920s. The real Azerbaijan is south of the Araks River in Iran. It's Iranian Azerbaijan, ancient Media Atropatene, and those people had been living south of the Armenians for thousands of years. The real Azerbaijanis have been living south of the Armenians and really have had, they went to war back in the ancient days, but those people have been as staunchly allied with the Armenians as the Persian Iranians were throughout most of their history. So a very different story from the Caucasian Turks, or Turco-Tatars as we called them before Sovietization. Sovietization created a historiography, a synthetic historiography for this Republic of Azerbaijan, which before then had been called a few other names, but not Azerbaijan. And so really we're looking at what's, a lot of people like to say it's a battle for civilization. I've heard that a lot of times, a battle for culture, but all too often that falls within religious lines. I think that this is not a religious conflict by any means of the situation. It's an ethnic, cultural conflict that deals with, on one side, the Aboriginal autochthonous population of the region fighting against colonists. That's the only way I can put it. The one side is a mixture of Turkified Armenians, Turkified Caucasians, Turkified Iranians who don't even know what they used to be. Most of their genetics are still from the region. That's the other interesting thing, is these enemies of ours, they probably have 70% genetic similarity to us. They were, the Turks who arrived, the Oghuz Turks that arrived, they were colonists. They were imperialist invaders. They were tribal, but they had empires and things to think of. So they were coming in 10, 12,000 riders to populations of 10 million, Aboriginal populations of 10 million people. Most of these people became politically of the people of the invaders. Like I said, somebody had said recently, how much actual Central Asian DNA is in Azerbaijani genetic structure is still to be really kind of seen, because they keep a lot of stuff under wraps in Azerbaijan. It is also like a state that is despotic and doesn't believe in free journalism and doesn't believe in free speech. And so we're really looking at two very different approaches to culture bordering each other. And both sides believe that this land is theirs for various political and historical reasons. That's kind of a background of the whole thing.
Wow. Getting into this interview, I really wasn't expecting our conversation to take this turn, but I am so fascinated. Because
I'm glad.
So great. You're so great at explaining this. I really was not expecting it. Since a couple more questions about this, and then we'll move on to your music career. But based on everything and everything from the history and following the current situation, I know this is you're not a politician. Even politicians don't know what's going on or what will happen. But just some of your ideas of what you might see happening in the near future for Armenia and for that region. Any ideas? And I know that, again, this is not concrete stuff. That there's no factual things that we could cite and explain. But based on your observations, what do you think might happen?
Well, to use history as sort of an example or a primer for this situation, I wouldn't be surprised if Artsakh remains a separate political identity from Armenia and Azerbaijan. I I could see possibly, as long as ethnic Armenian side is able to hold out against the military might of Azerbaijan, and their oil money. If they can hold out against that, the political integrity of Artsakh as a political unit unto itself, I do see a future for. It's interesting because a lot of Armenians look at that and say, you're not patriotic. How could you? Don't you want to unify Hayastan and Artsakh? Well, yes, of course. But we have to understand, if you look at this from a historical standpoint, let's go back 1,000 years. Let's go back to 1020. In 1020, there were no less than 8 different Armenian kingdoms, completely separate from one another, sometimes not even allies, completely different. And to counter some of the claims from within our community, no, this isn't the reason why Armenians lost power. If anything, in my opinion, the fractured nature of the feudal situation in Armenia with all the Nakharars fighting each other, that's literally why we survived, because nobody was able to take down any one unit, because no one unit was on the same side. So if this guy's a turncoat, well, that's messed up. But because of that, his principality, his innocent farmers, they survive. Because it really, at the end of the day, has to do with massacring populations and peasants and the real people. If their Nakara was a bad man, but he may have protected their people, well, those Armenians survived, and a whole bunch of other ones didn't, and so that's going back 1,000 years. Going back 2,000 years, there was at least 2 or 3 Armenian states. A lot of time, like if you look in the Persian era, there was a couple Eastern Armenian states, and there was a Western Armenian state, and they were separate satraps and separate, not just provinces. They were really separate countries. Granted, this was at a time when Armenia was bigger than Texas, or at least the Armenian lands were bigger than what constitutes Texas today. Today, it's as big as Maryland. So it's a big difference. We're talking about territory, but in this region, there have been multitudes of Armenian states. It's not the worst thing in the world to have an independent Armenia and to its east, an independent Armenian Artsakh. It's not the worst thing in the world. It's not that I don't want them to unite. I think that there probably is some strength in unity in terms of security and cooperation and economy and things like that. But it's also not the worst thing in the world for there to be 2 separate Armenian countries. It's not, but as long as there's no major imperialist power to play those 2 countries against each other, then you're doing, I don't see that necessarily happening. Not at this point in our history.
Yeah, let's move on. Let's go to a different topic, but we'll maybe come back to this at some point. And
sure,
the conversation with you specifically about Armenia and history is so fascinating. I feel like we could do another podcast just dedicated to your thoughts about everything that's happening and the history, because you have a great way of explaining what happened in the past and what's to come for the future, hopefully positive for our country.
Yeah.
You were born in Massachusetts. Tell me a little bit, every Armenian has such an interesting story about how they got to a place. What's your history? What's the background for your family?
Yeah, so I was born in Lawrence, Massachusetts, which at one time had a very large Armenian population. It's a region of Massachusetts called the Merrimack River Valley, and it's a series of mill cities and mill towns, factory towns that came up around this river in Massachusetts called the Merrimack River. And it's a whole bunch of cities on both sides of Massachusetts and New Hampshire. And to this day, it has a very large Armenian population. Almost the entire population of the Merrimack River Valley comes from the Harpert Plain. Almost the entire population are from the Volsky Dasht. Yeah. And mostly from the villages, Tadem, Habusi, Arabkir, of course, Harpert City and Mezre, but that's where most of the Armenians of this region are from, and I am no exception. I have most of my family is from, the Bedrosians are from a village called Habusi, which is now underwater. It's under the Kiban Dam. The Turks dammed it in the 1980s, and it's too bad because that's the area where the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers meet. So archaeologically, there's a wealth of Neolithic, Bronze Age, Iron Age the archaeologists went nuts when Turkey announced it, and they just scrambled to try to get as much stuff out of there as possible. It's also one of the most fertile parts of the modern Republic of Turkey. So for them to flood it completely with water is kind of crazy. And a lot of those dam projects have ended up causing droughts in Syria and Iraq in the 80s.
Wow.
And we all know what happened to Syria and Iraq after the 80s. So it's really kind of interesting to. But yeah, Habusi village, that's where the family's from. And some of my family is from the city, from Harpert city itself. And then a few family members are from another village called Sarıgamış, but it's not the Sarıgamış near the Republic on the Turkish border. It's another village called Sarıgamış that was in the Voski Dasht in Harpert province. And so basically all of my Armenian family is from Harpert, from the Harpert plain. And my grandfather, many members of the family were killed in the Hamidian massacres in 1895. And the survivors still stayed on until the genocide or right before it. And genocide was obviously really bad in Habusi. There's several books written about how it affected Habusi specifically and the villages of the Voski Dasht, because most of those villages fell to outright massacre instead of death march. There was a death march out of Harpert, but a lot of the villages fell to just massacre, terrible, terrible massacre and torture and slavery. Those were the main aspects of what happened in Habusi. My grandfather was captured a couple times, but when they got him, they put him in a school with a bunch of the other kids. And my great-great aunt, who I knew my whole childhood. You sound like great aunt. You wouldn't think you would know your great aunt, but I knew my great aunt all my childhood. She lived to be 100 and something. She saved him, bribed one of the gendarmes, and they went on foot in the night through the Syrian desert to Aleppo, and then to Beirut for several years, and then to Valence, France for several years, and then to Boston area, Lawrence.
Oh.
So yeah, in my family, there's four or five genocide survivors in the family, but most of the family wasn't that lucky. I lost about 45 members of the family in the genocide.
Wow. And since you mentioned Massachusetts, there's the great Armenian American composer Alan Hovhannes, who lives about half an hour away from where you grew up.
Yeah, yep. The great Wales compositions.
Yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, it's about half an hour, because I remember looking at it. He was in Somerville, Massachusetts, I think.
Yeah, Somerville. Yep. Yeah. Which is a place where my band Secret Army plays very often, very, very often in Somerville. Somerville's kind of like, for those who know the area, it's kind of like a borough of Boston. Like Boston has a bunch of little cities around it that are almost like it's Brooklyn, Bronx, Manhattan. Like, so there's a whole bunch of little ones: Allston, Brookline, Cambridge, Somerville, Quincy. And most people consider these Boston. They consider it Boston, but especially Cambridge. But it's all kind of the same urban cluster. Yeah, Somerville is very close. It's about a half hour.
We talked a lot about your passion for Armenians, from history to all the things that you've done musically also, and we'll get to more. But have you been to Armenia? That's always an interesting question.
No, it's crazy. I know, it is interesting. I've never been to the Republic. And again, being Western Armenian, growing up at the end of the Cold War in America, Western Armenians were connected to the Soviet Socialist Republic in the way that they could look at a map and go, look, there's something Armenian. That's something Armenian. But that was like the limit of Western Armenians' connection to the Yerevan, that part of the Ararat Plain. It's just, it wasn't in the Cold War. And then there was also the political, oh, you're Armenian, so what are you, communist? Like, that was like, what? We don't even speak Russian. We have nothing to do with Eastern Armenian. Like, so like there was such a divide. Then once independence happened, it was like, hey, you know, like there was like this coming together. Because I feel like for a long time, Western Armenians, at least in the diaspora, lived this sort of double life where they were proud, but they also didn't talk a lot about being Armenian, because a lot of people don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Like it was so little knowledge of Armenians in those days in the West that most of the kids I went to school with didn't even know what that is. They didn't even know, what is that? You don't even have a country. There is no Armenia. Like, So it causes, beyond genocide, it causes some post-generational trauma. You know, that's like actually a really interesting concept. But to make the long story short, no, I haven't been to the Republic, but in my travels, I've played Republic of Georgia, and I've been through Turkey. And of course, being Western Armenian, that land to us is just as important as it should be, really, to all Armenians, in my opinion, although that's not a very popular statement these days. Most of our people have pretty much given up on the idea of that being our land, but it is, or it was, and it was for a long time. It is very much in the hearts and minds of most Western Armenians, I would think.
Yeah.
At least ones who are passionate about their history.
Yeah. With all the collaborations you've done, any collaborations with, since this is an Armenian show, any collaborations specifically with Armenian artists that you've worked with over the years?
Yes. On one of George Clinton's album released in 2008, myself and Shavo Odagian did a track on George's album together called Stillness and Motion. And we've hung out a few times. We met at a P-Funk show. He was with his brother and his father, and they were walking up the stairs behind me, and they said in Armenian, "Oh, he looks Armenian." You know what I mean? I was like, "Oh, that's Shavo Odagian." So I asked, I said George's wife if she introduced me. So I met them, and then we started working together, doing stuff together, and so that's one person for sure. I also worked pretty heavily with the company Music of Armenia, which is run by Hazmik Movzisyan, who was a longtime resident of London, but now lives back in the Republic, and I believe is volunteering in Artsakh, if I'm not mistaken. And I worked for that company doing like a lot of promotional things, and they did kind of like a mini documentary on me, interview about, just sort of my work and my connection to the Armenian culture. And yeah, so those are the two things I could think of right now off the top of my head that are the close, definitely with Shavo. And then of course, I do have an erstwhile Armenian ensemble that I break out every once in a while down here in the Tallahassee area. We did a special 10-piece, like a dectet, musical concert for the centenary of the Armenian Genocide in 2015, comprised of Armenian music from like 1700 years of Armenian music. So we played like all different genres of ancient, classical, medieval, and modern Armenian music.
Wow. I do remember reading about that project, and I was going to ask if that's still going and if you're still active with that project. I do want to know, and I've been asking all the Armenian guests about this, is there an Armenian artist, one or two, or if the list is longer, let me know, but Armenian artists that you would love to collaborate with? You've been seeing what they're doing and you're just impressed with their work and you want to collaborate with them. Any artists that you're willing to mention on the show?
Sure. I would love to work with Serge Tankian. I think we're definitely have mutual similar backgrounds and similar ideas about the world at large. I would love to work with him on any kind of project. And really anybody else from System, including Shavo again. I would love to work with Sebu Simonian. I really love a lot of the solo stuff he's been doing and stuff with regards to the Armenians as well. I met once Tigran Hamasyan. We played a jazz festival together in Vienna, Jazz à Vienne. And we were that year, P-Funk was the headliner, and Tigran was the special artist of the weekend. So he played like every day. He did special, like he was like there's a word for it, I can't really think of right now, but he was the resident artist of the event. And he came to our show and I got to meet him. We hung out, we took a picture. I'm so mad because I lost that camera and we had a great picture of the two of us. And I really respect him, and he's one of my top 3 or 4 favorite jazz piano players right now. I just really love his style, and I think it'd be cool to do something double keyboard, double piano type of thing with him as well.
Yeah, and he's done
There's
that.
lots of people, everybody, everybody and anybody.
And he's done 2 piano work with a couple of other artists that I know of. Tell me about this Armenian comic book.
Yeah, so this is something that I've been into comic books since I was probably 8. And I really loved Marvel Comics, the Fantastic Four, and all that kind of stuff. I really loved Jack Kirby. And I loved how they took mythology and kind of put a comic book stamp on mythology, and were able to kind of make mythology and sci-fi together. So I'd always, when I was a little kid, we used to make comic books. When I was like first, second, third, fourth grade, me and my friends used to make comic books and sell them in elementary school. Talking about little capitalists. and like, so like, at 8, 9, 10 years old. And I flirted with the idea of writing and drawing comic books for a long time, but obviously music was my main thing. I come from family of piano players. So that was going to be probably my main thing, but I was always really interested in comic books. And about 8 years ago, I started working with an artist from the Netherlands. He's not Armenian, but he's fantastic and like really immersed himself in Armenian culture for this project. So much so that it took us 8 years to complete the first issue. I have it here. Sons of the Sun. And this first one is Hike the Hero, Hike Nahapet. And it's really fantastic artwork. And there's maps and history and stories and demons and monsters and love and war and all the stuff that goes into the epic, the epic tale. And the second issue, we've been working very hard on past few days, starting the second issue. And I'm using a different artist for every issue to kind of change styles for each one. But the second one's going to be on Vahan and his fiery birth on Mount Nemrut, and the volcanic birth and all that kind of stuff. And I'm really excited about it. But the first one came out late last year and it already sold out. We're going to do a second printing, but it was really popular with fans of all different kinds. Like, it wasn't primarily an Armenian audience that was buying this, but I didn't know that I was going to necessarily continue and do a ton with this until the most recent conflict, to be honest. Like, I had been like, well, I wrote a second issue. I don't know when I'm going to do it. But the most recent conflict just had me thinking, more about our youth and about the education of our people. Our people know a little bit of Soviet history. They might know the history of the genocide, and that's it, So like, the first part of me was like always into educating our people about our proud ancient history. And for me, I feel like we've got heroes. Those boys serving in Artsakh, those are our heroes. We've got heroes. It would be nice for our little boys and girls to see heroes on a page too, and be able to relate to those heroes and know that those heroes have been related to them for thousands of years, hundreds of years, and that those heroes are real institutions of bravery and heroism in them. I feel like every single race and nationality has some representation in comic books. Armenians, we have it's a little tiny, Robert Kupelian did a great East of Byzantium. He did a great book.
I have that.
And I'm very, yeah, me too. I'm a very big fan of Dan Panosian as well, who's a Marvel artist and has done stuff for a number of companies. But I think the general feeling is that, Kupelian already did East of Byzantium, so that's it. This history is 4,000 or 5,000 years old. East of Byzantium is one very particular period, To give an example, my comic book is a story in a story. So every issue starts with an ashug, and the ashug is talking to the villagers in some medieval kingdom of Armenia, but it's always a different one. It's always a different ashug. And the first issue was Sayat Nova. But then there's the story he tells. And that's the bulk of the book, is the story and the time and the place in Armenia that he's talking about. It's a whole different period and a whole different timeline. So I wanted to make something that could instill some kind of pride in our youth on a comic book page and be like, wow, this is really cool. But kids, our culture, our kids, more than the adults need to stay woke up, but the kids, they need escapism from the situation that's going on. Like we want to keep them informed. We want them to know they're Armenians. We want them to eventually know about the genocide. But one thing I feel like as Harper sees, they almost told us too quick. We were too young when they told us about the genocide. It's almost like it's happening again. And now I'm the new 5 or 6 year old kid being mortified by these stories from these older women who were not holding back. And so I feel like that's important, of course. But these kids, our Armenian children are getting barraged with so much anti-Armenianism. They're hearing so often that there are people that hate them. It's true. Those people hate them. They hate us. But we have to also give them something to be able to escape. You know, if they just focus, I mean, even adults, if we just focus on the Turks hate us, they hate us, they hate, yes, unfortunately, you know, we live with this existential issue our whole lives. So I can't believe there's a whole, not a whole race, but there's a people that pretty much hate us, hate our race. It's a bad word in their country, you know what I mean? Like, and you have to get over this psychologically. And for kids, I just feel like heroes, they could use heroes right now. And I want to help. And I want them to be kind of real heroes from our history, you know? So I feel like I started doing this again because of that. So that was sort of my impetus behind it. Well, so the next issue will be coming soon, hopefully.
Yeah. And since you mentioned System of a Down, I don't know if you know, but John Dolmayan is really into comic books from what I remember reading. And I think he might even have a comic book store in Vegas. So maybe send him a copy or something if you get a chance. have him put that out there.
No, I was thinking the exact same thing because I know he has the store. I was thinking this, I'm going to send one out to him.
Before we started recording, you mentioned that you're working on a new album and a little bit about the new album and how it connects to this time. I know you said it, I think you even said it when we started recording, but a little bit more about that. And also just what it takes to put an album together. You've done it many times, what it takes to select the pieces, what it takes to select the musicians that you're going to have for that particular album, just your whole mindset in putting an album together, because it is a big undertaking.
Yeah, it is definitely a big undertaking. That's a really good question too. This album will be my 16th or 17th in name, you know, the 16th or 17th album that has my name on the title. And it'll probably be the 30th album that I've produced and the 200 somethingth album I've been on. So that being said, I do a lot of work on LPs, on albums. And with my albums in particular, the vast majority of them took 9 years, 8 years, 7 years to make. So a lot of these albums are in the making simultaneously, kind of staggered. So it's like like as we speak right now, there's this new Secret Army album, which it's mastered, it's completed. We're just waiting on the artwork to get finished and then the duplications. Then there's another album I'm doing of P-Funk songs. That's almost finished, but it's not mastered yet. Then there's another album I'm doing with the Nalbandian brothers, who are producers from Yerevan, who are fantastic. I've been doing an album collaboration with them for the past year. It's been some of the most popular stuff I've done, some of these singles with them. So that's coming out. And then another album on a female artist that I'm producing. So that's 4 right there, not including projects I'm doing with other bands and other artists and with my boss and all that kind of stuff. So those 4 that I'm producing, those are all in various states of completion. And usually at a time I have anywhere between 2 and 4 in that situation where it's just kind of like moving through song by song. This album has 5 songs right now. This one has 12. This one has 18. You know, they're in various states. But a lot of times, if it's one of my albums, if it's a Danny Bedrosian just solo album, I'm kind of on a different thing every time. Some of them have been solo piano. Some of them have been electronic. Some have been, I did one that was like a bunch of songs in ancient Hurrian. I did a whole bunch of different stuff for the solo projects, almost just different every time. The last one, Lucine and Arev, which I also have here, my last solo album I put out last year. This is basically like a love album between the moon and the sun, like a love song between the moon and the sun. But it's mostly classical music by little known composers from the Romantic era turned into R&B songs. So that was like my concept for this album. With Secret Army, it's always more political, not always, but political and conceptual. There's always like a cartoon, there's an overt message of some kind or a combination of messages that are put together to make it happen. A lot of times I will have an album I'll be working on and I'll be like, you know what, this is two different albums. And I dissect and they go into their separate ways and they become two separate albums based on the criteria that form these very two different definitions. And then other times I produce very schizophrenic albums. So it's very much a cycle. Like one year I'll do an album where every song is a different genre. I have a few of those. I have like a few of those albums, like every song is a different genre, like classical, R&B, hip hop, metal, Armenian music, folk music, like just crazy diverse. And then I'll have one, then the next one will be super focused and everything will feel a very specific way. It's very much in a cycle. And because I produce so much music and doing so much, I have the opportunity to go through those motions and not only do a lot of different kinds of things, but revisit things. And I'm really proud that I never signed any deals, to be honest, with any record labels. I had a few options. One time I really messed it up and probably shouldn't have. And then another time I shouldn't have, and I gladly didn't. But because of our day and what we're doing in our day and age, owning your own masters is now a possibility. You don't have to be signed by a company. Most of these companies were always doing these recuperable deals anyway, where they gave you $20,000, you got to give them back that $20,000 or whatever. Like, there's all kinds of crazy stuff with record labels. So having my own label, my own publishing company, my own production company, it's much easier, much easier for me to be able to do what I want to do and be the artist I want to be, whether that means towing the company line or doing something so left that people are like, what was he thinking? You know, I want to be able to do both. I want to be able to be straight and narrow and crazy and everywhere in between, and be able to constantly revisit that throughout my career as I get better at my craft. So.
And I'm sure you've been asked this many times on all your interviews, a little bit about your relationship with George Clinton and what you've done over the years, because you've had such a long relationship with him. And also, from what I remember reading, I think it was like 5 or 6 days ago when we first connected about you coming on the show. I think I even remember reading something about you helping him with a book. So a little bit about your relationship with George Clinton over the years, and maybe maybe some fun stories too.
Yeah, I'm one of those ones who, well, first of all, the George's band is the longest running band in American history. So the thing a lot of people don't know, it's the longest running popular music band in American history. It's been going since 1955, and George, his group, the P-Funk Collective, is the largest single discography of any one musical collective in the history of music. So 500 plus albums under the P-Funk canon. So George, very pivotal character. When I was a little kid, 11, 12, 13, I always said, I'm going to be the keyboard player for George Clinton when I grow up. That was my goal. That was the music that I liked. And it encompassed a whole bunch of different stuff that I'd been studying, and it never bored me, and it was always innovative. And so it was my favorite band and genre all through my growing up. And I worked really, really hard at it, and eventually got called down to do studio work with him. Then I did some technician work with him on the road. Then when they saw me play live, then I got the job as the keyboardist, and I've been the keyboard player for the band since 2003. So it's been about 18 years, something like that. And George, I've because I came in, I first started first met George when I was 16. So he's known me since I was a little kid, basically, you know, and so it's kind of like there are some of these people that he's known for so long. We're like his kids too, kind of, or like his, you know, his nephews or nieces or whatever. It's something, you know, and it's definitely a family dynamic that makes up a big part of this thing. And, you know, I pride myself in being a part of this great American institution. I also pride myself on being able to stay as long as I have, because a lot of people go by the wayside far before me. I now have the longest tenure in the band's history for keyboards. I now have the longest single, and it's an unbroken tenure too. So I never left and came back. It's just an unbroken 18 years. And I'm really proud of that. And proud of the fact that, you know, I have a relationship with George that has a musical component, but he's also very, very well read. And so we have a whole friendship that we're always talking about politics and science and I mean, all kind, history and just, I mean, you name it, art. And yeah, he had a book that came out a few years ago. I mean, I only helped in providing, like sometimes I'll help providing information, like they need a list of every band member who had ever been in the band. And I think I helped compile that, like statistical things like that I help with a lot of times. Because of my historical background, I'm really good at kind of crunching numbers and compiling stats of who was what and who did what, that kind of thing. So I've helped in that regard a few times as well. But, you know, my main role in the band has been, you know, as the keyboard player. But George also calls me the what does he say? The band musicologist. So if ever there's a question, like if he needs help, like, Danny, who played on that? It's some random session from like 1977. Keep in mind, this is before I was even born. I'll be like, oh, it's so-and-so. He only played on that and one other song. You know, there's something really abstract. And it's funny too, because this being sort of the biggest band that ever was, there's also all kinds of weird imposters, people that have like gone on Wikipedia, like pretend they're in the band and like all kinds of stuff. And when you're in my position, I'll be like, who are you? Yeah, I was in the band. I'm like, yeah, were you? Are you sure? Because I pretty much know everybody that's even whistled on a George Clinton album. I don't know you. I'm not sure I know you. You know, it's really funny. But I pride myself on sort of knowing that, because it's that much like Armenian history. I've always been connected to these really vast, monstrous kind of epic things. You know, Armenian history is vast. P-Funk discography, super vast. You know, classical music, having to play classical music live, you know, having to just sort of know 1,000 pieces at any given time. Like, this vast kind of concepts that always intrigued and enticed me. And maybe it was the challenge, or maybe just I like the epic nature of big, grandiose things that go on for years and years. There's something really valid and valuable and aesthetically pleasing about that to me. So that's sort of how my role is in the P-Funk. And I've been, at this point, it's funny because I was one of the young guys for a long time, and now I'm a mainstay. And I think people still, because the band is associated with like the 70s, you know, it's an older band. They see me and think, oh, you must be the new guy. I've been here about 2 decades now. So there's a lot of new guys that are newer than me, but yeah, I'm really proud of them. I'm proud to be a part of the legacy. So.
We're getting close to about an hour, and it might be one of the longest shows I've done for the Armenian Music Project. It's really fascinating. But a couple of more questions.
Thank you.
What is, and I know it's so tough, especially having done so many albums and so many performances, but is there a moment in a performance on a recording session where, you know, it's one of your favorite moments, it's really memorable for you for whatever the reason might be, whether it's the first time you played with George Clinton or the first time you recorded something, an Armenian album or something? Just, is there one memorable moment that comes to mind when thinking about your career?
Wow. I mean, there's probably a few. It's hard for me to discern those type of things because, I mean, I've been playing since I was 3. Mm-hmm. My parents run a piano school up until they retired this year. So they ran a piano school up until very recently, you know, pretty much their whole adult life. My sisters and I all enrolled in the school, and so I played piano my whole life. And yeah, it's it's hard to pick a particular time, but there were definitely like my first time seeing like 500,000 people in an audience, that type of thing. Like one time in Denmark and one time in Brazil. That blew my mind. There's things like that for sure. The first time doing that Armenian concert for the Centennial of the Genocide is definitely a big one. Like I left a tour in Japan to come back and do that. It was very important to me, and ended up being one of the most memorable musical moments in my career as far as just emotional sort of importance to me and like what it meant to do it. And I mean, concerts, yeah, I feel like I was made to perform. Like when I'm in the midst of a good performance, that's, I think, me at my best. If I can really kind of, I always say this in so many interviews, but that balance between like the most control you've ever had and feeling like you could fall off at any minute because you're constantly challenging, pushing the barrier, that is the place I like. I live in that place. And on the stage, that's where I live. And I thrive on it, you know? And so for me to pick any particular time, I'm so visceral with my performances. Even when I was just doing classical, when I was much younger and I was being reared to be a concert pianist, it was always my performances, I think, that I was known for, kind of passionate, fiery, and just moody in general. If it meant being really quiet, I'm gonna be the quietest. If it means being really powerful, I'm gonna be the most powerful. Like just the emotion, the emotive, just letting it all go. And I feel like, not to toot my own horn or anything, but I feel like that's been my sort of strong suit in music. It's what keeps me passionate about everything in the arts that I do, because I'm able to sort of emote that. And of course, now with COVID, it's been a crazy time home, but I get to spend it with family, which is a huge blessing. Huge blessing. But yeah, that sort of emotive, if that thing goes right, I'd say whenever that thing happens on any given night is my favorite moment of my whole career. And luckily it's something that regenerates. It happens almost every day if you can allow it to. So I'd say that's by far my favorite, and it's a regenerative thing. So that's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, one more question before we end. It has two parts.
Sure.
One thing you want to tell your fans from all over the world, something you want to tell them during this time, during the pandemic. It's such a difficult time for so many people around the world. And the second part of that is something to the Armenian people with everything that they're struggling with, everything that they're going through at this time, whether they're in Armenia or in the diaspora. So those two questions, please.
So for the first part, for people that are suffering all over the world, I think that we as human beings should probably be very cognizant at this time. And I think a lot of people have come to this realization that we're all in this, every single human being, and this is unprecedented in its historicity. Like, this is the first time. World War II didn't even affect the whole world. The Spanish flu didn't affect the whole world. The Black Plague didn't affect the whole world. This pretty much affects the whole world. So short of future alien invasion, this is going to be the most uniting human factor that there is. Of course, I'm being facetious, but it is really a uniting thing, as bad as it is. And I would urge the people around the world, although, of course, I can't do anything to help on a singular level. I think now more than ever is the time for us all to be united with our families. And I think just to not take for granted the optimistic, the glasses half full side of what's going on, in that we're able to step away from this busy, I got to do this type of lifestyle. And instead of being stressed out or worried that somebody is out competing you or beating you at whatever in this globalist world we have where we're all at the rat race, we can all sort of enjoy the fact that everybody's in the same boat. And now we can spend time with our kids. I mean, I think that that's like, maybe outside of extreme poverty and outside of things that cannot be changed as a result of this pandemic, I think that not taking that for granted is the most valid advice I can give to my fellow man. Now, to my Armenian brothers and sisters, I'd like to say, just from my own personal experiences from the last 3 weeks, I feel like the waves, you know, to quote another Armenian from history, the waves of history are rushing upon me. And I feel like they're rushing upon all of us. We're living in a time, and now separate from COVID, Armenians are living in a time that is historically going to be very important. And I feel like most of us who are sensitive to it can feel, like I said, the waves of history rushing upon us, or at least the feeling that what's happening now is similar to struggles we've had in the past. I think we should just, as Armenians, forever be cognizant of the fact that, you know, we have been oppressed for a long time, but that our power lies in our singular strength and our ability to take that singular strength and come together. And I think that most importantly, that singular part I want to emphasize, because Armenians have always been really good individuals, really good at individual thought. I feel like each one of us needs to look at our individual talents and abilities. The last time there was a ceasefire was 94. I was 13. I'm 39 now. When I was 13, I had to look at what can I do. Now that I'm 39, I have to look at what can I do? How am I most valuable to my people and to my cause? Of course, I have the single, like I was saying before, Azadum Kasab, and I meet all people's donations with my own money. So whatever, if you send 10, I'm going to put 10 in too. You know what I mean? Just to show, because I think it's my connection to non-Armenians first that have no idea what's going on that allows me to scream about it as much as possible. My non-Armenian friends must think I'm insane right now for the Instagram, because I'm just, and I'm not the only one. I am so proud of Serge Tankian and Sebu Simonian and Mary Bazmadjian and all these people, music and comedy and art and acting and all these different Armenians that have come out, just like barraged social media with truth. It makes me so happy. I feel like that's one thing I can do. I can barrage social media with truth. And it's important when someone like I'm doing it, because like I said, I belong to that second group of Armenians that's surrounded by non-Armenians that have no idea what's going on. And then my second important thing is that I myself, being a musician, can elevate our people with art and music and make them, instill in them whatever, and information, and instill in them whatever hope and pride and courage that they need. I think those two things are probably the two things that I, as an Armenian person, as a citizen of the world Armenian nation, can bring. And I think in a lot of weird ways, it's a blessing. It's a lot of people think it's a curse that our intelligentsia is spread all over the world. You know, at one time, our intelligentsia was basically in Tbilisi and Constantinople. And that was, you know, that was like where our people were. But unfortunately, they were also on the front lines of the massive changes and the societal pandemic that ended up kind of washing over most of Armenian intelligentsia and wiping us out. Now Armenian intelligentsia is all over the world. And the one benefit we have of that is the Turks can't get us. They can't get us in Paris and New York and London and Moscow and Abu Dhabi and Addis Ababa and LA. They just can't, you know what I mean? I mean, you know what I'm saying. I'm not issuing out a threat. I'm just saying we are in positions now to really alert the world using our strong truth, our truth that we have on our side, and our history and our minds, our strong minds, and be able to explain to the world everything that's happening. And I think that's the most important thing that I could do. I think each one of us has to look inside ourselves. Each one of us has a valuable, valuable set of skills. Each Armenian is such a skillful people. We just have to look inside ourselves every day, not just once, every day, and say, what can I do to help this right now? Where am I most valuable? Where is it? Is it fighting? Is it speaking? Is it writing? Is it donating? If you're the Armenian millionaire out there, donate. You know, if you're everybody should donate, but you know what I'm saying. Wherever your strong point is, utilize that. Really look inside yourself. Get introspective and look inside yourself. How can I, as an Armenian, help my people best? And I think that's the most important thing that we can all do.
Danny, it's been a pleasure. I think that's the best place to end today, and hopefully we'll have you back and talk more about this, because you've said so many things. It's really fascinating. So thank you so much for being on.
Thank you, Tigran. I hope I can be on again soon.
Have a beautiful day. Thank you.
Thank you. You as well.